Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to COS at Home. I am your host, Jonathan Viod, and thank you so much for joining us for another exciting program this evening. Tonight, we will be sharing a challenge from the COS Chief Muckety Muck, Mark Meckler, discussing a new video. We'll also be discussing a new video series, and we'll also be answering some important questions from you in the audience during our Minutemen Mailbag segment. For our interview segment of the program, we will be joined by former Oklahoma Secretary of Education and current Oklahoma Superintendent of Public Instruction and COS supporter, Ryan Walters. Now, I do have to let you know we did pre-record this segment of the program. You know my feeling on this. I always love to have our guests live to give you an opportunity to ask them questions. But we do from time to time have to, make these recordings to accommodate the schedule of our guests. And unfortunately, we did have to pre-record, but don't worry, it's going to be a great interview and you're not going to want to miss this. Okay, but before we get started, I do want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at the Article 5 Outfitters. And let me show you the latest gear that we have there. Term limits now, we the people. Another great t-shirt from our friends over there at article5outfitters.com. That's the COS store. Go ahead and check out some of the new things that are going to be coming. There are going to be even more shirts that are going to be available and a lot of other great content. I was even seeing earlier they were talking about some new hoodies for women. So be on the lookout for that. Just a lot of great stuff over there. So please shop for your favorite Patriot, especially as the holidays are getting closer, at article5outfitters.com. For those of you who may be new to the show and new to the organization, I'd like to welcome you to Convention of States. We are a grassroots movement focused on the goal of utilizing Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to call a convention for proposing amendments to the Constitution that would reduce the size and scope of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, and place term limits on all members of Congress and federal officials. In order to hold this convention, we need 34 states to pass our resolution. So far, we have 19 states that have done so. So thank you so much for joining us. That's a brief introduction to our organization, and we're so glad to have you. Now it is time for 5 for 5. All right, now this one's going to be particularly exciting because tonight, for 5 for 5, we're excited to announce the upcoming Article 5 Scholar Series. This series will premiere on Constitution Day, so that's September 17th, and will continue weekly for 12 weeks. Each Tuesday this fall, a new video with the Article 5 Scholar Series will air on all COS social media accounts, right? So you want to check us out where you're finding us right now, right? On Facebook, on YouTube, on Rumble, X. We're all over the place. X, that's the artist formerly known as Twitter. So check out our social media accounts for these videos, because what they are, they're versions of essays written by Article 5 scholars such as Robert G. Nadelson, Michael Farris, and others. These are going to be easily digestible, perfect for sending to legislators or to other family members or anyone who wants to go deep into COS and Article 5 and understanding where the scholars come down on this issue and talking about important topics within the Article 5 realm, such as the 1787 Convention, the Necessary and Proper Clause, the history of amendments in America, the progress of Article 5 scholarship, rules for the convention, and so much more. So tonight, we have a special for you. We've got something special for you. We've got a sneak peek of episode 1, which features a visualization of the words of the great Michael Farris.
We trust the Constitution, answering the Runaway Convention myth, written by Michael Farris, JD, and LLM. Some conservatives contend that our Constitution was illegally adopted as the result of a, quote, runaway convention, unquote. They make two claims. Number one, the delegates were instructed to merely amend the Articles of Confederation, but they wrote a whole new document. And number two, the ratification process was improperly changed from 13 state legislatures to 9 state ratification conventions. The claim that the delegates disobeyed their instructions is premised on the idea that Congress called the Constitutional Convention. It is claimed that Congress instructed the delegates to solely amend the Articles of Confederation. A review of legislative history clearly reveals the error of this claim. The Annapolis Convention was the political impetus for calling the Constitutional Convention. The conclusion of the commissioners from the 5 participating states was that a broader convention should be called. They named the time and date, Philadelphia, second Monday in May. But who was to call the convention? They said they were going to work to, quote, procure the concurrence of the other states in the appointment of commissioners, unquote. The goal of the upcoming convention was, quote, to render the Constitution of the federal government adequate for the exigencies of the Union, unquote. What role was Congress to play in calling the convention? None. The Annapolis delegates merely sent a copy of their resolution to Congress and the executives of all states, quote, from motives of respect, unquote. What authority did the Articles of Confederation give to Congress to call such a convention? None. The power of Congress under the Articles was strictly limited, and there was no theory of implied powers. The states possessed residual sovereignty, which included the power to call this convention. 7 state legislatures agreed to send delegates to the convention in Philadelphia prior to the time that Congress acted to endorse the convention. The states told their delegates that the purpose of the convention was the one stated in the Annapolis Convention resolution, quote, to render the Constitution of the federal government adequate for the exigencies of the Union, unquote. Congress voted to endorse this convention on February 21, 1787. It did not purport to, quote, call, unquote, the convention or give instructions to the delegates. It merely proclaimed that, quote, in the opinion of Congress, it is expedient, unquote, for the convention to be held in Philadelphia on the date previously informally sanctioned by the Annapolis Convention and formally approved by 7 state legislatures. Ultimately, 12 states appointed delegates. 10 of these states followed the phrasing of the Annapolis Convention with only minor variations in wording, quote, render the federal Constitution adequate, unquote. 2 states, New York and Massachusetts, followed the formula stated by Congress, quote, solely amend the Articles, unquote, as well as, quote, render the federal Constitution adequate, unquote.
Yeah, so those videos are going to be incredibly educational and helpful to you when you're trying to get the word out about Convention of States and Article 5 in particular, and answering some of these important objections or questions that people have. There's much more to that episode. That was just a preview. These videos will range from about 5 to 8 minutes apiece, and that is just going to be an amazing series. Again, it's debuting starting September 17th on Convention of States social media pages. Again, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, X, so many other social media accounts that we have, Instagram as well. Don't miss those, and I know that I'm not going to miss any one of these because there's probably a lot in here that even I don't know, and I've been involved with Convention of States for 10 years, so I'm looking forward to that, and I hope you are as well. Okay, now let's hear about the latest COS news from across the country, and to do that, I will turn it over to my dear friend, Producer G, with COS Now.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
Convention of States supporter Tucker Carlson has announced a 16-city tour for Tucker Carlson Live. And there's a special offer for Convention of States supporters.
He's going to be all over the country. Well, the big announcement is we're launching a new partnership with him. You know, Tucker's a big supporter of Convention of States. Maybe you saw the show, his old show, where I sat down with him for an hour, kind of wide-ranging discussion about Convention of States.
I personally am for it.
This September, Tucker's embarking on a 16-stop tour where you can meet him live and in person all across the country. My favorite part? Convention of States is going to be at every show. We've got a deal where our grassroots activists are going to be there in the lobby with a table, educating people about Convention of States, having them sign petitions. You can get tickets on a discount by going to tuckercarlson.com and use the promo code COS15. That'll give you a 15% discount on the tickets. Get your 15% off tickets. Use that promo code COS15 at tuckercarlson.com. And if you're there and I'm not there, tell them I said hello.
A new endorsement for Convention of States, this time from Texas Congressman Pat Fallon. Fallon recently grabbed headlines for questioning the now former director of the Secret Service following the failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
You just said you had the ability to beef up the security. You knew about the threat, and you didn't. And that's as telling as it is chilling. I believe your horrifying ineptitude and your lack of skilled leadership is a disgrace, and you should be fired immediately and go back to Garden Doritos.
In a statement, Fallon said, "As a steadfast believer in the American principles of liberty and limited government, I am proud to endorse the Convention of States movement."
I'm a big proponent of term limits. I think people should come here for maybe 12 years, serve and then go back home. I don't think you should have folks here 30 and 40 years, but money doesn't fall from the sky, although a lot of people in Washington think it does. The debt is so high right now that our current levels of spending, in 10 years, half of the federal budget is going to go to interest on the debt. Right now we're spending, Tony, $400 billion a year just on servicing the debt. Those programs are going to get less and less resources given to them because the debt's going to gobble everything up.
Learn more about Convention of States supporters at conventionofstates.com/endorsement. Last week, members of the Convention of States team attended a national conference of state legislators in Kentucky, the first time that we've attended an NCSL event. Here's Rita Peters and Mark Meckler to break it down.
It has been busy, but the best thing is the meetings that we have had with state legislators from all different states while we were here, just one-on-one meetings and small group meetings with our headliners.
The vast majority of people that Patty handed a card to said, "Well, I already know about this. I already know about you. Like, your people come to my office all the time." So we had an Ohio legislator that actually said, "Oh, I already know about this. Your people are in my office all the time. In fact, they should have had your people hunt for bin Laden because he would have been caught and killed a lot sooner." And he meant it as a compliment. You can go into any legislature in America. We've proven that here today. You could talk to any legislator, Democrat or Republican. They will know about Convention of States.
Our people are activists, and that's really been borne out here by the number of legislators who've said, "Oh, I know. I hear from your people all the time."
The COS Iowa team blitzed the Iowa State Fair to collect an astounding 4,000 new signers for the official COS petition. Visitors to their booth included state legislators like Representative John Dunwell and State Senator Jeff Reichman, as well as Blaze TV host Steve Deace. Recent grassroots events like this one have pushed COS over 2.6 million petitions all time. For example, the COS Oregon team recently attended a logging show to share how Article 5 can cut out the administrative state. And the Colorado team encountered enthusiastic citizens at the Adams County Fair, collecting nearly 500 new signatures. Meanwhile, the Wisconsin team recently reported on their activity at the Republican National Convention and engaging with delegates. One volunteer was even featured on Fox News. News stories about local Convention of States efforts have popped up in several states recently, including Delaware and New Mexico. Finally, here's a smattering of recent photos from grassroots events going on around the country, including Wisconsin, Delaware, New Jersey, Florida, Oregon, Texas, North Carolina, Indiana, and Illinois. And now, you're up to date with Convention of States.
What do we want? When do we want it?
Just amazing stuff going on across the country. And thank you, Producer G, as always, for taking the time to highlight that. And I just want to emphasize those 4,000 petitions gotten during the Iowa State Fair, and then other events where we've gotten well over 400 petitions. I mean, it's incredible what the grassroots are able to accomplish out there. So big tip of the cap to them. I also want to give a highlight and a shout out to our Tennessee and Texas teams. They were at the Gun Owners of America conference in Knoxville, Tennessee, where we got over 300 petitions signed there. Also, the Louisiana team, joined by some other activists from across the country. I believe we had an activist from, I think it's from South Carolina or Indiana, I believe, that was there with them. And they were able to, at the American Legion conference in New Orleans in Louisiana, where they were able to collect nearly 300 petitions. So just incredible work that's been done over the last couple of weeks by our activists, and couldn't be prouder of them, because it is not easy to get these petitions from people at events. You think, oh yeah, no problem, people just come up and sign the petition, no, 1, 2, 3. It's not that easy, and our activists do an incredible job. So well done to all of our grassroots. Okay, folks, now is the time for our interview segment of the program. As I mentioned, we had to pre-record this conversation, but it is my great pleasure to welcome to the program the former Oklahoma Secretary of Education and current Oklahoma Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Ryan Walters. Superintendent Walters, it's great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I typically ask first-time guests to tell us their COS story. Now, many in our audience probably don't know this, but you actually are a petition signer for Convention of States and once were a district captain in Oklahoma. So tell us when you first learned about Convention of States and why you believe Article 5 provides us with a solution to our problems.
You know, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. I absolutely love the work Convention of the States are doing. I'm a huge fan, been a big supporter for a while. And yeah, my story really started, I was a history teacher. So I loved American history. I was always familiar with Article 5. But, you know, the first person to really get me on to understanding really the practical application today and why it is the answer was Mark Levin. I'm a big Mark Levin fan. So, you know, heard him on the radio show talking about it, bought his book, The Liberty Amendments. And that really got me down the road of, yeah, I think this absolutely needs to happen now. I believe the founders were absolutely brilliant in so much of what they did. But in Article 5, giving the people the direct ability to amend the Constitution in case our elected officials got out of control was a very brilliant move on their part and one that we should absolutely be utilizing. So, yeah, I've got to give Mark Levin a lot of credit for really getting me fired up about its practical application today.
So I would consider you one of the OG then Convention of States folks, because for a lot of us that got started way back then, Mark Levin was kind of the way that we got involved. It was the same for me reading the Liberty Amendments and then finding out about Convention of States from there and then coming aboard. But not as many people have read the Liberty Amendments. I've found. I think a lot more people now lately have come on after what happened with COVID and everything that went down in 2020. So it's nice to hear an OG supporter of Convention of States.
I will say, I mean, that book, absolutely go get it if you haven't, because, you know, it is great. You know, I was a history teacher, and so many times I'd read a textbook that would really gloss over Article 5. And, you know, and as I got to reading more about it, it's like, guys, this is a big piece here. And you read the arguments back and forth of why it was included. Again, Mark Levin's book there, he really lays out the case and all the constitutional arguments, you know, what was said about the practical application of that and what it would look like, how it would function. This is all really laid out in that book very, very well, both historically and then kind of today. How would this work? What are some of the amendments that could be proposed in that way? It's a great read.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned that your career in education started as a teacher. You were a history teacher. And then I was reading that you were appointed by Governor Kevin Stitt as the Secretary of Education in Oklahoma. But in 2022, you decided to run for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. So what inspired you to seek that office in particular?
Right. You know, first I was a teacher, then I became a parent. I've got 4 little kids and, you know, especially going through COVID, looking at an education system that's just so broken, seeing the left take over our schools, seeing the left take over our educational systems across the state and across the country. I was frustrated. Parents across the state were frustrated. And so I thought, look, you know, I want to run and try to make things better for all the kids, for all the families, for all the parents in Oklahoma. And so that's really what inspired me to run, looking at my kids and thinking about everybody else's kids and that they should have the opportunity for the best education possible. And as we continue to dig into this, both in our state and across the country, you see an education system where the left is trying to teach kids to hate their country, hate their family, hate their religion. And that is absolutely absurd. It goes counter to everything the founders intended with our schools, with our education system. So we're going to get back here in Oklahoma to a place where we reject things like critical race theory, DEI, transgenderism in our schools. And we're going to go back to understanding the founding. We're going to go back to understanding American values. We're going to go back to the basics of math, reading, and science. And that's how you get kids on a pathway to be successful and to live a high quality of life. But it really does start so much of it with understanding what makes America exceptional, what made us the greatest country in the history of the world. And it's so imperative we get that back in our schools.
Absolutely. And so what is the difference between those two positions when you're the Secretary of Education as compared to Superintendent of Public Instruction?
Oh, great question. So as Secretary of Education, you're really an advisor to the governor. So you don't have the control of the agency and the constitutional power. So separately, we're one of 11 states that elect the state superintendent. So, we were always running into problems with the state superintendent who was a Democrat, who was owned by the teachers unions, owned by the woke school administrators. And so I knew the only way to exert change, the only way to create an education system to put parents first, not bureaucracy, was I needed to run for this office and win it. And so what we did, I came in, I fired 130 bureaucrats. The media went crazy. The teachers unions went crazy. I said, look, we want less government, not more. We want to empower families, put them in charge of their kids' education. And again, I'm unapologetic. If we're going to reject left-wing wokeism in our schools, and we're going to get back to that pride of country, patriotism, and again, getting back to it's practically common sense. I mean, that's the crazy thing now is common sense in some circles is uncommon, but the reality is most Americans, most Oklahomans know exactly what I'm talking about. They've been frustrated with their education system, and so I'm unapologetic that we'll reject that union, teachers union, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden agenda here in the state of Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And, education is so fundamentally important in our society because even if folks choose, and we're big fans of school choice with Convention of States, and I know you are there in Oklahoma and as well here in my state of Florida. But even if you don't send your children to public schools, our society is still impacted by those who do go to public schools. And so it's so important that we pay attention to what goes on within the education system, so much so that we on COS at Home have discussed education on this program with other guests, such as Dr. Kevin Roberts, Pete Hegseth, Dr. Tom Lindsay. And I made the point to them when we were discussing it that although the COVID lockdowns caused an immense amount of damage and harm to our country, one of the few silver linings to come out of that situation was that parents became aware or maybe awakened as to what their kids were being taught in school and how politicized the curriculum had become. I mentioned that a few minutes ago as well. So whether it was critical race theory or social emotional learning or gender theory or all of these other poisonous ideologies that have run rampant through our public and even in some private schools, I guess before we get into specifics about what you have been doing there in Oklahoma to attempt to address these issues, and you already mentioned firing 130 bureaucrats, which is great. We want to shrink government and also make sure that we've got the people in there promoting the values that are going to make our country better. I'm wondering if you have ever taken the time to take a look back and say, well, how did we get here? Pinpoint for me exactly where we went wrong with our education system that brought us to this place where we had these poisonous ideologies infecting the classroom.
That's such a great question. And I think it is important that we do go back and understand where it came from. And what you saw in the 1960s was that cultural revolution, right? That anti-American strain in society that really built up. And what happened in the 1960s is so many of those countercultural supporters there got into our colleges. They became college professors. If you remember when President Obama ran for office, people were making these connections. I know Glenn Beck was a big one of going, hey, hold on. All of his professors are these wacko left-wing extremists, some even terrorists, and was making the connection of, these are President Obama's, good friends, very close associates. What is going on here at the University of Chicago? Well, you pan out and you go, this was happening at universities all over the country. These radical leftists went on to be college professors. You then start moving so much of the American population through our colleges and universities. They have been overtaken by the left. I'm sorry, the colleges and universities are such a captured entity by left-wing extremists. You see this with their anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic movements that are going on right now that are just absolutely disgusting. But you see that, and it shows you where our colleges and universities are. So they were taken first. And then once you have a hold of higher ed, then you get into the schools and you start controlling the curriculum. You start manipulating who is going to the classrooms, who is going to be administrators. They start, instead of bringing in teachers, they bring in social justice warriors. The teachers union keeps them all in line, fights off conservative teachers, drives them from the profession. Then you go to today and you go, well, look, if about 40 or 50 years of that type of movement, that type of initiative, your good conservative teachers are growing more and more frustrated. They don't want to be in the profession. You got teachers union control. You have the federal government, which has continued to overstep. That Federal Department of Education, President Reagan and President Trump both said it shouldn't exist. We should abolish it. that has continued to grow and weaponize itself against the states also. So you add all that together, and in the past, 5 or 6 decades, the left has created an education system that is weaponized against the country, the family, and Christianity. And that's why we've got to turn it around. And I'm going to tell you, it takes drastic measures and real boldness to turn it around, considering how long the left has had control over it.
Absolutely. We need to paint with bold colors and not pale pastels, as President Reagan once said, right? And, I appreciate you taking the time to kind of take us back and look at where we came from and how we got to this point, because to me, we're not going to be able to accurately assess or fix the problem if we don't pay attention to how we got here and we don't fix that. And to me, I think it's so important that we embrace a culture of self-governance. And part of that starts with the education system in our states, and not just at a state level, but also looking at it from a local and municipality level, and getting involved with school boards and seeing what's going on and what's being taught in these schools.
Well, that's exactly right. And to your point, I mean, that's why, look, I'm a history teacher, so of course I'm going to be passionate about history, but also just as an American, you look at our founding fathers, what did they do? They were folks and individuals of faith. You look at their Judeo-Christian values, they understood that. They were also students of history. They did deep dives into ancient Greece, ancient Rome, what went right, what went wrong. How do we study human nature through history to create a system of government that respects those rights and those natural rights, this natural law that God had put in place in this world? And how do you understand human nature to best create a government reflective of that? Again, the only reason that we're able to have such a successful form of government is because of the understanding of those universal truths. And we have allowed the left to weaponize and lie about our history to our kids. They lie about this country. They don't want your kids to know history. And one of the things we're doing right now is we're rewriting our social studies standards, our history standards here in Oklahoma. We want more of an emphasis on primary sources. I want kids reading the Constitution, reading the Federalist Papers, reading the Declaration of Independence, doing deep dives in these documents. But notice what the left has done. You don't actually read those documents anymore in most classrooms. They have you read what some professor says about those documents. Well, when you do that, you can manipulate and lie all you want. And that's where you've got kids that hate George Washington, hate Thomas Jefferson. Well, have they ever read Thomas Jefferson? Have they ever read George Washington? Or are they just going off of what some law professor says about them? And that's where we've got to get back to teaching our kids real history. They need to read directly from our founders, directly from our influential people throughout our history. Not only will they know more about American history, they'll love this country. That they will fall in love with these individuals from history and understand, like, this is incredible. And that is how you continue to build out this incredible dream, this American dream for young people, that kind of self-belief that they can achieve great things, they can lead a high-quality life. If they learn from history, if they have self-discipline, if they have these traits that individuals before them had, it's such a powerful tool, but we have to go back to teaching it. We can't allow the left to weaponize it and lie to our kids. And I think that's a critical, frankly, if we don't get this right, an existential threat to this country. If we allow them to teach our kids to hate this country, we will no longer cease to be a great country.
Absolutely, well said. And it's funny that you were talking about the need to go back and look at the social studies curriculum there in Oklahoma, because that was one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about and saw in some headlines. You're getting flack over this, but you've brought in some incredible experts to help you with overhauling this curriculum, including some COS supporters and endorsers like David Barton, Dennis Prager, Dr. Kevin Roberts, Steve Dace, among others. But in addition to that, you've also seen shortly after Louisiana passed legislation bringing the 10 Commandments back into the school, you said, I'll see that, I'll raise you, and announced that Oklahoma is going to be requiring the teaching of not just the 10 Commandments, but the Bible itself in all public schools. So I guess my question for you is, and from what you've already been saying about the need to study the source material, it seems like it's very similar to the classical model and classical approach to education. Is that what you're looking to accomplish with some of these moves?
That's exactly right. I mean, the classical model of education has been proven to be successful. It dates back centuries, frankly. And that's what, you hear people that we know how to educate young people. We've done this before as a society. And the classical learning model takes all of that into account. So I absolutely love classical learning. We are absolutely embedding that across the board here in our standards and in our curriculum and the way we're teaching things here. And again, you look at the Bible and look, the left has lost their mind over it. But, what we've said is, listen, it's part of our history. I mean, that's not even, how can you deny that? It's the most cited book in American history, the most read book in American history. How do you understand why the Pilgrims came here if you can't mention Christianity or the Bible? How do you understand what Thomas Jefferson meant by "our rights came from our Creator"? I mean, how do you understand how most Americans would read that? Martin Luther King Jr., his letter from a Birmingham jail, he cites the Apostle Paul as one of his examples for why he knows that, look, if he's doing right in the eyes of God, even if he's breaking the law, he thinks that God will look on that kindly. Again, how do you tell that story if you're going to let the left censor you and say you can't mention the Bible or anything from the Bible? So here's the reality. The left can be offended. They can not like it, but they can't rewrite our history. And so the Bible in its historical context will be back in Oklahoma schools, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, you should be. You absolutely should be, because this country was founded on Judeo-Christian values and principles. And I think because we have become so untethered from those principles and we don't teach the Bible in schools, and, people think, well, you're going to be down religion on this, and there needs to be a separation of church and state, which, again, show me where that is in the Constitution. But it's important, again, as we talked about when we were just talking about the issues and how we arrived where we are with the education system, we have to understand why we arrived at this point in our history as American citizens. And there's no way to do that without understanding the Bible and the impact that it had on the founding of our nation.
Yeah, I'm a big Churchill fan too. So I know we're talking about American history, but I'm a big Churchill fan. I loved how once, he described, hey, look, the further back you can see is also the further ahead you can see in society. And it's just a reality, again, like it, don't like it, agree with it, don't agree with it, offend by it, whatever the case may be. How in the world do we continue to be a great country? How do we continue to be unified and try to understand what's the path forward for us as a country to help our citizens live the best lives possible, protect individuals, protect our liberty, protect our rights, if you don't know where we came from, if you don't have the historical context to understand how did we get here today? And again, it's just a simple truth of history, is those that don't learn from it are doomed to repeat it. So why in the world would we not do all that we can to ensure that our young people understand this country is great? And you need to understand why it's been great, because if you don't, we will cease to be great. So I think it's a very practical, common sense approach. We've allowed the left to dominate education since the 1960s. The U.S. Supreme Court lost their mind in the 60s, made all these anti-Christian, anti-religious rulings, banning the Bible, banning prayer. Well, those are absurd. Again, go back in our nation's history, go back to the Constitution. The founders would be mortified to see the government weaponized against Jews and Christians the way it has been. And so we're going to continue to uphold what the Constitution says. And clearly, we have the right to have the Bible in its historical context in the classroom.
Absolutely. So now, with all of these crazy ideas that you have been promoting and decisions that you have made from your office, you've been taking arrows from just about everyone, left, right, center, you name it. People have been coming after you and everything that you've been trying to accomplish. And, as I've been told, typically when you're taking so much incoming fire, that means you're right over the target. So, but nevertheless, all of that, I'm sure, takes a toll on you, must take a toll on your family. And I heard recently in an interview that you said it's the grassroots that keeps you centered and focused. Could you elaborate on that? What did you mean when you said it's the grassroots support that you are receiving that keeps you focused?
Well, look, it's the grassroots that are America, that are Oklahoma, and again, you mentioned at the beginning, getting to be a district captain of COS was a great opportunity for me to get to work with people to try to achieve this goal of bringing these amendments to fruition. And here's the reality. If it's not for the grassroots folks in our state and in the country, we wouldn't have a country anymore. They are the ones that are fighting for our liberty, fighting for our freedom, fighting to return us to where we are as a nation, to that exceptional country. And those are the folks I'm out fighting for. I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have any opportunity to create the change that people in Oklahoma want if it wasn't for just your solid grassroots people of our state. And so I'm never going to back down in fighting for them. I'm never going to back down to a woke mob who tries to bully or attack me or my team or my family, I'm going to continue to fight alongside those grassroots individuals that got me into the position that I'm in. Again, that gives me the opportunity to try to make change, positive change for the people of Oklahoma. So I will continue to fight for them, fight with them, fight alongside them. And frankly, I think it's a model for every state. It is absolutely your grassroots leaders, your grassroots individuals that are going to make sure that the positive conservative change that you want can happen.
Well said. Well said. And I know we've got some amazing grassroots activists there in Oklahoma, and John Gwynn and Becky Wolf. And I know they've met you and they've supported you and everything. And I think it's important that our grassroots and people get involved again, because I think I think Dr. Tom Lindsay shared this quote with me from Abraham Lincoln. He said, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next, right? So that's why we at Convention of States may think, well, focused on Article 5 and trying to get the convention to happen. But in states where we've already passed our resolution, we need to be involved in these kinds of fights. And we need to have the grassroots paying attention to what's going on with our education system and participating to the best of our ability. So the last question I have for you, Superintendent Walters, we have a ton of supporters across the country, right? And I know many of them are watching this right now, and they may hear everything that you're talking about and say, yes, I need this in my state. This is what needs to be done. We need to take back our education system, whether it's a red state or a blue state. So what would be your advice for how they can take meaningful action to influence that type of change? And where do you see Convention of States grassroots teams being able to help with that action?
No, thank you for that question. And yeah, John and Becky are great. They have been tremendous in helping not only Convention of the States here, but to help getting our schools back on track. So they have been absolutely tremendous partners here in Oklahoma. And it's a great question. And I so appreciate Convention of the States understanding the long play, because the left have been very good about it. Hey, if we control our education institutions, hey, we've got the future. We're fighting in the here and now, but also we're the trajectory of where government's going, of where society's going. They have controlled your biggest, kind of cultural drivers, which is, media, Hollywood, and now education. Well, you guys are doing a tremendous job by going, no, education, you're not going to be controlled by leftists any longer. And so I think it's so important for us to understand the long-term goals of Convention of the States to make sure that we have the ability to get these amendments in place through Article 5 does rely on our young people understanding the Constitution, understanding the values of this country, and understanding that if we do not protect those values, we will no longer cease to be this shining city on a hill. That will cease to exist. And our young people have to understand that. So I believe that is so essential to the core mission to get the schools back on track, to make sure that the Convention of the States goals continue to be in place. And here's what I would encourage everybody. Hey, run for your local school boards. They're so crucial in everything you do, that they help make sure that the schools are on track. Run for local office, get out, mobilize, call your friends, families, neighbors, educate them. Education is so important because so many folks don't truly understand the Constitution and the vision for this country that our founders had. So important to continue to get that information out and educate the folks around you. And then frankly, guys, we have got to get President Trump back in the White House. I believe it's absolutely essential for the country right now. We talked about eliminating the Department of Education. Folks, they're coming after me all the time from the Federal Department of Education. Joe Biden is coming after every state in the country to try to weaponize your education systems against parents, against the family, against Christianity. We have got to get President Trump back in the White House, get everybody on your blocks to go vote, get President Trump back in, and then get good school board members on. Make sure that you've got good conservative governors. Again, you're from Florida, so you got an awesome one right there. But hey, you've got to make sure that you're getting good conservatives who understand this country, understand the country's values in office, so that they can help create those changes that are necessary. But grassroots, you are the key. You are the key to all of this happening. It will only happen through you, and don't lose the faith. The left is after you because they know that, and continue fighting the way that you are, and we will have those successes.
So I'm curious, and I know I said that was the last question, but I've got one more question for you. So you had mentioned that the Federal Department of Education has been putting pressure on you, and obviously we believe one of the ways to deal with that Obviously, if President Trump were to be reelected or elected a second time, he's talked about removing the Department of Education. It's a big lift. That's something that we could also address if we had an Article 5 convention where we're in our resolution addressing the size and scope of the federal government. We can take education out of the scope of the federal government. But could you tell us specifically, what is the federal Department of Education doing to you? Because I'm sure people may hear that, but may not know specifically what it is what kind of pressure you at the state level are feeling from them at the federal level.
Yeah, let me give you the biggest one that was, we saw it coming. Luckily, I still couldn't hardly believe it when they did it. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris woke up one morning about 3 months ago now and said, hey, if you don't allow boys in the girls' bathroom, boys and girls sports, we will take all of your federal dollars from you. That was just an announcement they made one morning. And so we instantly, I'll tell you, I met with other states, but we had this set up where I said, we will not comply. You can come after us. You can try to weaponize government against us. You can try to jerk dollars back from us or whatever, but we're not going to comply, number one. Number two, we're going to sue you because this is a completely illegal action that you guys just woke up one morning and decided boys were girls and girls were boys. That's ridiculous. They didn't follow any of their own processes either. They just literally were like, no, we're just going to make this decision this morning. And so just to show you the type of threat that you came under, and by the way, it wasn't just the money. If you didn't do that, it was lawsuits would be brought against you by the federal government for not allowing boys in the girls' bathrooms, boys and girls' sports. It was an incredible threat, an incredible oversight from the Federal Department of Education. But again, as long as we have a Federal Department of Education, those type of things will continue to happen. This is the department that forced CRT down our throats, transgender education. All those things came from that Common Core. If you want to go back even further, Common Core came from that organization. So the Department of Education has partnered with the teachers unions to push this woke ideology on states and to weaponize government. It should not exist. We've got to get rid of it. And I agree with you completely. It can be done through Article 5. Absolutely. That's one that should be nixed immediately.
Definitely. So last thing, for anyone in Oklahoma that may want to help you and support your work or support what you're doing, where can they go to do that?
Yeah, I'm very active on Twitter, Ryan Walters, SUPT, so Ryan Walters Superintendent on Twitter, and we're very active on Facebook as well. But hey, follow us. We're going to continue to move a conservative agenda here in Oklahoma. We're going to continue to lead the country in what conservative reform looks like in education. We're laying out the blueprint right here in Oklahoma for other states to follow. So yeah, come follow us on social media and continue to activate in school board races, local races, continue grassroots to demand more of your elected officials. I get flack all the time from some in my own party going, hey, can't you just slow down? Can't you just not keep doing these big initiatives? And I say, absolutely not. That's what I promised the people of Oklahoma I will do. I will deliver on these promises. I will get our education system back on track. I will bring the conservative American values into our education system, and I will not be stopped, and I will not back down from those promises.
Well, Superintendent Walters, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. We appreciate your support. But above all else, at least speaking for myself, I really appreciate your willingness to take all of the flack, take all of those arrows and the bullets that are coming at you, metaphorically speaking, not actual bullets, but willing to do all of that and stand in this gap and do everything you can to protect education, to empower parents, and to turn things around for our country. If there's anything that we are devoid of right now, it's courageous leadership, and you are being very, very brave in everything that you do. So God bless you, God bless your family, and thank you for all of your support.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the work you guys are doing so much, and I'll help you in any way that I can.
And that was just an amazing conversation. I hope that you enjoyed that. Superintendent Ryan Walters is a rising star, in my opinion, there in Oklahoma. They've got a great, courageous leader, and it's something that we need desperately in our country. Is we need leaders that are willing to stand up and take all of the incoming fire and say, no, you will not advance any further. We are going to take a stand here, and we're going to defend the things that are good, true, and beautiful, and do what's necessary to improve the education in our country. So again, thank you so much to Superintendent Ryan Walters for joining us. Okay, so let's now move on to action at home. All right, so tonight we have a special message, as I mentioned earlier, from the COS chief muckety muck, Mark Meckler, where he is going to be issuing a challenge to all of you. Check it out.
Hey everyone, Mark Meckler here, and it's unbelievable to think that this year marks the 237th anniversary of our Constitution. You know, the average Constitution in the world lasts 17 years, so something must be pretty special about ours. In honor of the Constitution, we're launching the Constitution Challenge to do something extra special. What is the challenge? Pretty simple. A lot of people have never done it. Read the United States Constitution. Every American needs to know what's in the Constitution. It's the highest law in the land, and even if you've already read it, you should read it again. In fact, the Constitution's so special, my favorite president, Calvin Coolidge, called it the greatest political privilege ever accorded to the human race, and I agree with that. If you read it, you might learn something that you didn't know before. In fact, even if you've read it a whole bunch, you probably will. I always do. And while the feds in Washington, D.C. have abandoned the United States Constitution, we at Convention of States are fighting every single day to restore it. So go to conventionofstates.com/1787. Take the Constitution Challenge. I promise you, you're not going to regret it.
You want to take that challenge. You know, a huge component to what we do at Convention of States, why it was important that we use this in the Action at Home segment tonight, is education, right? The fact of the matter is, the reason so many people don't know about the second method to proposing amendments found in Article 5 is because many people don't know about many facets of the Constitution. Many people were maybe taught about it in school and rarely have had the opportunity to actually sit down and read it. In fact, I remember in college, I took a business law class, and it wasn't to sit there and read the Constitution. It was to study case law, right? And study stare decisis and precedents that came down through various different Supreme Court rulings, not the underpinnings of the law and understanding the Constitution. That's not what we need, right? We need to we need to read that document and have a clear understanding of what our role is within our system of governance. So I love this challenge. It's one I'm going to take. I think it's a great opportunity for all of you to take some time, read the Constitution. It's been a while, honestly, for me, since I sat down and read it from start to finish. So I encourage you to check it out. And I also think what it does is it gives you a great opportunity to do this with some small groups, or perhaps at meetings, or with little local political organizations, or just even amongst family and friends. You can challenge each other, learn about it together, and just, again, understand why it's so important that we defend this incredible document. As you heard Mark say, so many constitutions, or the average constitution, only lasts about 17 years, and here we are 237 years later. It's not yet, and we need to do everything we can to protect it and defend it. So again, please check out the Constitution Challenge and more details at conventionofstates.com/1787. Now, let's go ahead and check the Minutemen Mailbag. All right. So once again, I mentioned at the top of the program, we're going to be answering two questions in one during the Minutemen Mailbag. It's amazing to me how many of you write in questions, and it's like you're thinking along the same lines as somebody else from another part of the country. And so we just thought it would be a great opportunity, again, to address two questions in one. So the first was written to us by Kimberly, and Kimberly says, "I'm not against term limits. The latest stunt by our president on changing limits for the Supreme Court, perhaps after all the schooling and through the career to reach level being considered and then vetted be on the Supreme Court, perhaps they only have 15 or 20 years left term limits. All branches would be wise to have term limits. So my question is, how does President Biden have the ability to just go in and change term limits for the Supreme Court and not all branches? Doesn't the convention, doesn't an Article 5 convention, isn't that required for us to have these term limits imposed on the Supreme Court?" And then Michael wrote in asking, when drafting the U.S. Constitution, why in their infinite wisdom, didn't the founding fathers stipulate the term limits for all elected officials and political appointees or bureaucrats at the federal level? So let's answer the second question first, and then the first question second. Hopefully I got that right. And so we're going to start with Michael's question. And the one thing out of the gate that I want to say is we have to be careful about using the benefit of the knowledge that we have of present day to judge the past. I think we do this a lot where we kind of look back and we say, well, how could they not have understood it? How could they have not known? We need to be careful when doing that. And we also just need to recognize how amazing it is that the founders had the incredible foresight that they did when crafting this document and all of the various different things that they debated at the Constitutional Convention. Again, take that Constitution challenge, read the Constitution, but maybe even go beyond that. Read Madison's notes, read the Federalist Papers, understand what it was that they were doing when making these arguments and why they came to the conclusions that they did, and just be careful to not be overly critical that they didn't do everything we want now back then in 1787. And I also think it's important to note, I did a little bit of research on this, Michael, to kind of get a better understanding that the founders did debate term limits, right? In fact, term limits were included in the Articles of Confederation, but some of our founders, like James Madison, the father of our Constitution, believed strongly that term limits could have adverse consequences to our governing system. So in Federalist 53, Madison wrote, greater the proportion of new members, the greater the proportion of new members, and the less the information of the bulk of the members, the more apt they will be to fall into the snares that may be laid for them. So basically, he felt that having term limits could lead to members being corrupt. And if we continue to interrupt the flow of government by bringing in new leaders, then the ones that are already learned and prepared and have an understanding of the system would be pulled out before completing their job, and new people that would have to learn the process and go through it would then be coming forward and possibly be open to corruption. So that was Madison's contention, and obviously many people, when they wrote the Constitution, believed this, and so that's why they concluded without doing that. However, Thomas Jefferson's comments to Edward Rutledge in a letter in 1788 is what really resonated with me. Hold on one second, Aaron. Hold on one second. Jefferson saw what I think we have now seen come to fruition, right? And he believed that the lack of term limits would ultimately lead us to where we are. And Jefferson wrote to Rutledge, I apprehend that the total abandonment of the principle of rotation in the offices of president and senator will end in abuse. But Jefferson went on to say, but my confidence is that there will for a long time be virtue and good sense enough in our countrymen to correct abuses. So what does that mean? We are the people that have to be the check against this. So we have to correct these abuses, and that is exactly what we're attempting to do with the Article 5 application that Convention of States is supporting. Now, getting back to Kimberly's question, the first question about the Supreme Court, and Kimberly, you are spot on. Hold on one second, Aaron. President Biden, or any president for that matter, does not have the authority to impose term limits or changes on the Supreme Court like that. Although what President Biden was proposing in his statement was very unclear, probably on purpose, what he was trying to say was that, or what he was trying to suggest was that Congress make these changes through statute. By passing laws and making these changes. Now, I'd encourage you to go back, check out our conversation from last month with Professor Randy Barnett, and he explains exactly why he believes such laws would be unconstitutional. Bottom line, term limits on the Supreme Court could only come through an amendment to the Constitution, and that would either be done through congressional proposal and then ratification by the states, or through the convention process. So, two terrific questions tonight about term limits. I want to thank Kimberly and thank Michael for their questions, and for all of you who submit questions. And we try to get to the ones we think would resonate most with you. Go to conventionofstates.com/mailbag, drop a question in there, and hopefully we'll address yours next time. Okay, now let's go ahead and move to COS Voices. as I mentioned before, one of the questions we receive at Convention of States is, how can I effectively communicate the COS message quickly? Erin, do you know how to effectively communicate the COS message quickly? No. Okay. She just wants to know when mommy's coming home. Thankfully, we have amazing activists to help Erin and to help you with communicating this message. They've done so with some incredible videos, and they've demonstrated exactly what you need to do. Tonight, we hear from Tom Hager from Louisiana.
Hey, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I'm sure you've seen our country change over the years with a Congress that forgot that we, the people, were given the power to self-govern by our founders. Washington is spinning out of control with crazy spending, runaway inflation, and a collapsing foreign policy. Many Americans feel that there's nothing they can do about it. We're frustrated. One of our founders, George Mason, felt that the Constitution created a federal government that might become too powerful in the future. He believed that individuals had inalienable rights that were superior to any government. Article 5 was written by our founders to allow the states to stop the power grab from Congress, call the Convention of States, and return the power to the states, and in turn, to we the people. Hi, I'm Tom Hager, and I'm simply asking you to visit cosaction.com and learn how you can be a part of this historical movement to stop Congress from their elitist power grab at a time where our country needs your attention. Hey, this is our country, and together we can make a difference.
Perfectly said by Tom. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our activists that have submitted those elevator pitches so that this way we can share them with you at the end of each program and help you with making your pitch for Convention of States. Well, folks, we've made it to the conclusion of another program, and just a reminder that all of our COS at Home shows air live on the first Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Our next show is going to be on Wednesday, October 2nd, again, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and our guest for that program is going to be Kimberly Fletcher, who is the CEO of Moms for America, and they are doing some incredible work with that organization. So I'm really looking forward to sitting down and speaking with Kimberly to learn exactly what Moms for America is accomplishing in our great nation, and really looking forward to that conversation. And I hope that you will be a part of it and join us. And we're planning to do that conversation live with Kimberly, so you will have the opportunity to interact with her, and we really are looking forward to it. So please join us Wednesday, October 2nd. And ladies and gentlemen, as always, I just want to take a minute to say thank you for being there, for supporting us. I really hope you enjoyed this program and the fun that we have here with COS at Home. Thanks again to Superintendent Ryan Walters for pre-recording his interview with us and being here. And thanks, as always, to the legend Producer G, all of the amazing work he does behind the scenes, including that cool new intro that we had to the program. I know he works incredibly hard, as do all of our comms team members, and I'm just so grateful for him and his support. But the greatest thanks, as always, goes to all of you, our audience, our COS supporters, our activists, for doing everything you can to support and work towards accomplishing the Convention of States goal and everything that we do with the Article 5 movement. It's important to remember, folks, that despite all the problems that we face as a nation, and there are a lot of them, you and I, we the people, are the solution. So thank you again for joining us. I do also want to take a quick moment here at the end of the program, and I should have let off with this and nearly forgot about it. There was a terrible tragedy in Georgia earlier today, another school shooting. So if you would, just join me briefly before we sign off for a brief moment of silent prayer for the victims of that shooting at that school in Georgia. And also, if you would, please add a prayer for our country. So if you would just join me here for a brief moment of silent prayer. Thank you so much, everyone. God bless you. Thank you for all of your support of our movement. And I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday, October 2nd. God bless you and have a great night.